All right.
Yes. Hello, everyone. We're here for the first session of Social Networks from Metaphor to Diagram to Machine by Professor Tiziana Terranova. Tiziana is the Associate Professor of Cultural Studies and New Media in the Department of Human and Social Sciences at the University of Naples, the Orient. She's the author of Network Culture, Politics for the Information Age, Pluto Press 2004, and numerous essays about digital media in journals such as Theory, Culture and Society, Culture Machine, New Formations, C Theory, and in edited collections. She's a member of Euronomade with the webpage euronomade.info and a co-founder of the Technoculture Research Unit. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to pass on the camera and the microphone to Tiziana to start the seminar. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you for inviting me for this. It's my second time with the new center. I remember we had another seminar a couple of years ago where I just started working on this project, which is this book for Minnesota University Press, which is called Hypersocial. And it's about the kind of social turn of the internet, which happened around, started around the mid-2000s. And this is more or less what I'm going to talk about today. So what I found interesting when I finished working on my first book, Network Culture, social media were just starting to appear in the list of the kind of new trends on the internet, but nobody would have predicted that they would come to dominate very much the experience of internet working by the late 2000s and even more now. So today I would like to start talking about this emergence and consolidation of this layer of the internet, which now is associated with a couple social networks and smartphones. So social networks and smartphones are seen as constituting a kind of new layer of the internet, rising on top of the World Wide Web and moving progressively towards an integration with smartphones. So this is, they started appearing more or less around 2003, 2004. 2004 is the year that Facebook was launched. And 10, 12 years later, you can say that more or less that wave has come to full fruition, and they're even, we can even say that they're not new anymore, and they have exhausted their innovative capacities. They had fully fledged, developed. There's not much else that is happening. Kind of basic format of profile, list of contacts, and feed has become the norm, whether it's smartphone-based or web-based. And it's not something that from a kind of technical or social point of view is exciting people anymore. It's very much the status quo. That's social media are around. So people are kind of excited now about blockchain technologies. So we're hearing talk about the internet of money. And they're more excited about the kind of embeddedness of the blockchain networks in social media with the purpose of creating new forms of transaction and new kind of financial tools and new forms of financialization. So this is the next step where everybody who's into what's happening that is new on the internet is moving on. And that means that there's been already a kind of stratification and sedimentation, both of the technology and of the kind of statements around technology and now technology. So it feels like everything very quickly is sedimented, and there is a certain kind of consensus or common sense has emerged about what this kind of media are about. And this is, for me, it's a good stage. It's interesting. You're not so much in the middle of this kind of wave of the new, but you're at the point where this is sedimented, is becoming kind of something that people take for granted. And you can start seeing things, I think, better now. So maybe it's a good time kind of to assess what this new layer of the internet has done. And one thing that, I don't know if you agree, that sedimented very quickly, and this become a bit of a common sense, is that social media, and in particular Facebook, but not only, destroy society. The social media are a threat to society, that they destroy sociality, they destroy a feeling of solidarity. They're really harmful for the social. And this is something that actually in the last year, 2017, something that is coming a lot also from within kind of the circle of kind of internet entrepreneurs. And in particular, you had two of Facebook's top managers, ex-top managers, Sean Parker, which was featured in The Social Network, the film about Facebook, as this kind of maverick, right, who said that, you know, this technology we have created has become really harmful. And also Chalapatia, who was the head of the growth and user engagement group at Facebook, one of the most powerful groups by all accounts, who also said that he was really ashamed of what they'd done, that they created this kind of dopamine-driven feed loops that are keeping people hooked, that they were so driven by engagement, trying to get people to stay as much as possible on the network, that they did not care about what they were doing. So the social media are destroying public speech, they are destroying communication, and especially, and this is something that came to the fore very much as a result after Brexit and after the Trump election, two things, I mean, two recurrent allegations have been brought up against social media. One is that they're divisive, so they're producing polarization. They are increasing polarization in society. They're increasing the level of conflict. They're getting, you know, people are not really talking, but they're more like armies fighting each other. There's communication on social media is very emotional. So polarization and divisiveness is considered the kind of the largest risk that these platforms are bringing to society. And fake news. You know, that they become media where basically they are destroying truth. So where fake news are circulated, you know, foreign powers, thinking about Russian trolls, right, are undermining elections. So you had all these allegations against this company called Cambridge Analytica that you might have heard about. You know, they were using social media to target people who were like swing voters, so that election could be affected. So a real threat to society. Furthermore, you are starting getting empirical evidence using kind of big data and social network analysis. Thinking about a recent study by Chris Tucker now. Yeah, I didn't write the name, but I will write it for you. I mean, I'll post the study where they say that Facebook in specific harms well-being. Right, there is a positive correlation between increased use of social media and loss of well-being. So, you know, this kind of this real, and this is particularly harmful for the company for reasons that we will see later. And this is kind of was very worrying for the company, and they have reacted, and we're going to talk about the kind of reaction in a little while. They reacted because they're also seeing a kind of, for the first time, a deceleration of the company's expansion. You have to think that they went from like a few thousand accounts in 2004 to 2 billion active accounts, right, by last year. And so it's been growth and growth and growth. So there were people who used to say that, you know, the main problem for Facebook was that it was going to run out of people on the planet. There were not going to be enough people to grow anymore. So, you know, they had invested in kind of bringing internet to Africa because they were looking how to expand, considering that they can get into Russia or into China because they have their own social networks. But also what is more worrying for them is that users' engagement is also down. People are spending less time on social media platform, they're posting less, though this has become something that is concerning, especially Facebook, which I'm looking at more closely because of its centrality has been this kind of massive big social networks, and also the kind of centrality in popular imagination or mainstream discourse about social media are identified with Facebook or Twitter, but mainly is specifically Facebook, which is considered the largest and most important one. So the company has reacted, and I've been following very much the kind of statements they come up with. They have been challenged by these allegations to the point where they've changed their mission statements. So when they started, for a long time, Facebook's mission statement, which is like the soul of the company, has been to make the world more open, to give people the tools to make the world more open and connected. And since last year, they changed the mission statements to help the Facebook new mission statement was going to be to make the world, to help build a global community. So there is a shift to the idea that their new mission statement, which you don't know how long it's going to last, is going to be to build the infrastructure, the global infrastructure for global community. So to actually bring the world closer, always to answer this idea that they're actually destroying society and global community. You've seen and you heard about this kind of frantic experimentation and tweeting they've been doing with the algorithms, with the feeds. First, they decided you're not going to see any more links to news sites. If I was going to be more about just your friends and families posts. They tried that first. They have this policy where they tried that in some regions of the world. They tried that in New Zealand first, and then they kind of expanded it to see whether it worked. They said they were going to introduce better artificial intelligence to find out and eradicate fake news, and also help people to be exposed to different points of view. So they have started in the last year, I think, to take responsibility for the fact that they become the kind of a really important political and social infrastructure. So they're not just providing a service for individuals to use, but they actually have some kind of social function. So, and if you think about it, the kind of attitude and statements that Zuckerberg has been assuming more and more that those were politicians. A politician that's talking about the way in which the platform should be governed. So it's a kind of form of platform government that they are concerned with. So this is a stage now. 10 years later, social media become nothing new, nothing exciting. They're kind of old. Kind of younger generation are moving towards Instagram because it's more relaxed. The format is the same, the feed, but there's less the tension that you experience. But I want to go back to the year 2005, 2010, so more or less 10 years ago, before this kind of consensus is solidified, to look at kind of what was happening right before the rise of these platforms and the kind of statements, again, that came from different sides. So we could say, on the one hand, Silicon Valley. Yes.
Sorry, I'm gonna interrupt to ask a question. The first question will be about the style that you would like us to interact with you, and especially the students. Would you like the comments and questions to wait for a point where you're gonna stop, or can we bring things up as you go along?
A good moment to bring things up. So I will stop.
Okay, yeah, Mike. Okay, if that's a good time, maybe the people in the class want to think about what they have in mind to ask in terms of what we just heard. My question is, when was the paper that you assigned to the class written or maybe written / published?
I think it was 2014.
Yeah. So basically, I already see a sort of like a shift even in your own attitude from the paper to what you're basically post-Brexit, post-Trump. Your attitude is a little bit, seems to, at least to me, as someone who read the paper, seems to be a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
And since that's the reading of the class, maybe then my question will be to I don't know if you want to do it now or later, but like talk about the shift in your own position in terms of your view of the, if you see any shift, even if it's small, how did it come about, and what does it represent, this shift?
I think that the Securing the Social was commissioned as part of a book on Foucault, right? And I, since the kind of new Foucault's courses on security and biopolitics were published in 2004, I read them quite obsessively. I started reading them quite obsessively in 2004, 2005, and I published 2 or 3 articles where I was kind of teasing out the consequences of some of the things that he said, the arguments he was putting forward in those lectures, starting from maybe 2007. That's where I started incorporating them. And my obsession has been with the notion of security, and which is the idea that you have a new techniques of powers, new mechanisms of power, which are addressed basically to circulation. So it's managing circulation, managing milieus of circulation, constructing milieus of circulation, managing circulation, because my feeling was that the network as a kind of technology and a framework has become the kind of technology of security par excellence, right? So the network is the technology which manages circulation, which makes sure that circulation is continuously expanding, and which circulation, the dangers to circulation are kind of managed in a way that makes them not a threat to this kind of circularity process. The second step was that what does circulate in networks? Everything that is about all kinds of circulation are managed through networks, all kinds of circulation, so logistical, goods, everything is managed through networks. But what is it that specifically circulates in social media, social networks, internet communication? What circulates, the other people have said it, they call them, Jody Dean has talked about them as affective networks. What circulates on the internet, and in particular on kind of social media, is this affective flow, which following kind of Leibniz and Tard and Lazzarato, I think affective flow, I believe that they are right when they say that the flow of affect bifurcates in flows of beliefs and flows of desire. So belief is what you believe. You can believe in it with more or less intensity. So you can say yes or no. It can be like a minor, not so important. It can be very fundamental. And desire, again, is about what you want and what you don't want. And in managing the circulation of these social forces, social quantities, they become data. It's a kind of a new technology, a new form of security. And as a new form of security, managing affective flows has different kind of implications. So that, technology of security, which deal with risks to health and more biopolitical risks. So securing the social is the end of this kind of 5, 6, 10 years process of working with Foucault's lectures, which left me a bit unhappy at the end, because in the end, securing the social argues, well, look, we have a technology that manages the circulation of something which was not put into circulation before. It's what people believe, all kind of beliefs, from people who don't believe that human beings ever made it to the moon, to racism, or to kind of feminism, to all kinds of, everything that used to be contained, within space, which, because traditional media did not allow all kinds of belief to circulate, but social media take everything, they put it into circulation, and that's how they got value out of it. So social media have managed to get that far, in putting into circulation kind of affective quantities and social quantities, making them social. But all they do is they keep them stable. So you can say everything, but it doesn't matter, right? it doesn't matter because in the whole general circulation of all kind of strange things that people believe and people want, want to buy or want to share, or all this is managed, is manageable, is kind of everything goes because the machine holds everything together. And this is, I think, it's kind of a danger of Foucault, right? It shows you how power works, and it shows you how power works so well that you think, oh my God, they managed, power has got to a point where now it's even managing, things that used to be, beyond what could be managed, which people, conversations that used to be private, they used to be in private places or even public places, but delimited. Look at what they've done.
But it seemed like you hint towards this limit at the end of the paper when you point to Foucault's own move away from the discourse of power.
Yes. But then, I didn't push it then, and I'm trying to push it a little bit more now. But also, I was interested, to say what has changed. What was interesting to me was the way this kind of mechanism seems to be breaking down a bit. So what you had with the Brexit and you had with Trump, the kind of this management of affective flows, so beliefs and desires, is reaching some crisis. It's not so. This crisis is hitting the company. They're scared.
Is it that social media evolved through this entropic process, or these were latent, kind of potentialities that were just there and we didn't notice them because there was no sort of real socio-political, economic opportunities for them to really rear their head? Is it that, or is it really some form of history or telos, where something begins at something and then it transforms into something else?
One of the things that always, in this time where I was really into Foucault, and maybe I'm coming out of it now, but it had to be done. One of the things that struck me in terms of its relevance, and I think it's a little bit of that, is insecure in the social, is Foucault's treatment of civil society. So when Foucault talks about the rise of civil society in the 18th century, so look at how in the 18th century the meaning of civil society changes. Look at how it changes when it goes from Locke to Ferguson, right? I say in Locke, civil society is still opposed to natural society. So you have to state on nature, and civil society is a civilizing process where you get away from the state of conflict. It's a state of nature, and the process of civilizing of society. He said with Ferguson things have changed, because with Adam Ferguson, we are in 1767 when he publishes his treatise on civil society. Civil society is presented in very different terms, and there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, I can put it in your list of new readings, so you can read all the really interesting features that Ferguson attributes to civil society. I can read them briefly. I was reading them today for this seminar together with Michael Hart article about post-civil society, which is also interesting. So the 4 principles of civil society for Adam Ferguson is an historical natural constant. There is not such a thing as humanity before society. There's no such a thing as humans living without being social. So the social has always been there. The social is a kind of a feature of the human species. So you cannot find human beings in nature before society. Then there's the principle of spontaneous synthesis. So it's something, again, that forms naturally. And again, you can see how social networks also have this kind of spontaneous, are considered this kind of spontaneous thing. That kind of develops on its own. It's a permanent matrix of political power. It's an historical, natural constant. But then this another thing, the things that really struck me about what he said two things, about civil society, so that I think that social networks are a kind of telos of civil society in this sense, right? Two things are really interested. One is that he says that civil society is a space where you have a kind of interest that is different from economic interests. And these are the disinterested interests. So a kind of interests which are not directly economic. And these are about sentiment and sympathy. This is what circulates in civil society. But also he says this thing, that for Adam Ferguson, civil society is not humanitarian. It's not humanitarian. It's not about humanity and the world. Civil society is communitarian. And communitarian means that civil society is about the people I like and I feel close to, and I feel similar to, people I feel like I have a bond of sympathy with. So if they suffer, I suffer. If they rejoice, I rejoice. And people I don't like. These feelings of sympathy are the correlate of feeling of antipathy, of feeling of hostility. So civil society implies that the global space is segmented, fragmented in communities whose bond is based on feeling of hostility towards others. So this idea that civil society is exclusive.
Okay, so it's interesting because if I want to sort of like build on what you said or just reiterate it, it seems like what we see in the last sort of like this new mode of social networks, which you spoke of in the beginning of a class, which is sort of like heightening the tension, creating like divisions and all that, as it's already inherent in civil society. It's just technology is allowing it for these clashes to actually take place in the open. Yeah. So in the past, we would exclude or we would like render invisible those we didn't like.
Yeah.
To give the civil society its sort of like civil interface or its civil skeuomorph. Yeah. Now in the new social media, these conflicts are no longer can be sort of like hidden or made invisible. So they're all, but it basically was inherent already in the way Ferguson defines the civil society.
Yeah, that's
civil society is an uncivil society in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And if you read it together, then we go on, it's good that we have two classes. Sorry for just being able to have two, but I have a huge numbers of students here today. Another one of those big classes. So yeah, no, we're going to talk about Radcliffe Brown, and the way in which in kind of social anthropology this notion is actually actualized. Sorry, I kind of lost what I was about to say. Yeah, no, but it's like you said, these disinterested interests, which are like sympathy, have been put into circulation. People get so upset in a kind of in a conversation about social media when they meet the interest they feel hostile to. These raw feelings which are coming out, right? Seems to me, to be inherent in the notion. Oh, yeah, no, I was about to say something else. Yeah. Because we're also doing this cycle of seminars with this group I'm working with, the Technoculture Research Unit, and we read Denise Ferreira da Silva, right, Towards a Global Idea of Race. So, and Denise Ferreira da Silva is a kind of a Brazilian theorist. Now she works in Vancouver. But the way she talks about the constitution of global space, it's exactly in these terms, right? It's about the constitution of regions. Different regions, so where some regions, as she put it, put the subject in transparency. So some regions are about self-conscious mind determination, and some other regions are where different people live with different customs. So this conception of the globality, the global space, as organized by the principle of race, engulfed by raciality. And I think this is coming together. I think it's a culmination of this process, and it's not by chance that this kind of racialization of the enemy also seems to come, to fruition in social media. So rather than destroying civil society, yeah, to me, the culmination of the tradition and the kind of the racialization of the other.
Now, another way to sort of like read this process, this historical process in a way, is to see it going from sort of like homeostatic cybernetics to like hyper autopoiesis, right? Like, whereas like, so the Foucauldian way is very much sort of like homeostatic cybernetics, where like there's systems of checks and balances and the network goes around, but everything is under control. But something happens and then the networks fall out of control. And then you're into this moment of like autopoiesis, which is sort of like the second or third order cybernetics, right? So is it also like correct to sort of like look at it that way? Or like people conceived of it more in the beginning in terms of homeostatic cybernetics, but actually it ended up playing out as a crazy autopoiesis form of cybernetics?
Even beyond that, because if you think about the kind of classical division between kind of autopoiesis, it was about homeostasis, right? It's about the organisms to start with. There was this kind of benign third wave cybernetics, which was very much something that the Silicon Valley crowd was in love with in the 90s. So it was about entropy was going to be good, because entropy was not about destruction, but entropy was about the production of new forms of life, and you could harvest that. You know, you could harvest these new forms that came from the, you know, Kevin Kelly wrote Out of Control and saying it's a good thing. The editor of Wired magazine, it's a good thing that the network is out of control, because out of control means that you get the production of new forms. And you can harvest that. You know, they kept using that term. You can harvest all this is coming out of the cybernetics out of control. But there was a kind of biological mode. And this is not biological, it's neurobiological. It's kind of the social brain. The social brain is a different kind of bios than the kind of benign artificial life mode of the 1990s, because it brings this kind of destructive power of affect and affective flow. So everything, the out of control now is different than the out of control of the 1990s. So it's even beyond that, because third wave cybernetics said, you know, entropy is good, but this is an entropy which is about, it's a neural entropy. It's a kind of social neural brain, social brain kind of entropy. So it's scary because it brings the ghost of civil war. So it's civil war what has become, a stake in, right now. Two things: it's either civil war, or it's what again Da Silva invites us to think of in terms of differences without separability. It's a drama of living in a condition no longer a post-civil society, civil war, and entanglement, differences with no separation. So you cannot get away from the people who feel, you know, who are like, you feel not civil towards. They keep impinging on your space. There's the kind of separation is no longer possible. And there is a source of a great deal of stress. So social media turn out to be very stressful because they continuously expose you to this kind of, to the enemy. You know, the enemy is everywhere. So either, you know, you can start thinking about this condition that, you know, poetically, I don't know how, the condition that Da Silva and Moten and all these people, you know, are thinking in those terms, you know, also thinking about these conditions of entanglement, of uncertainty, or if you bring the trajectory of civil society to the end, then you got civil warfare, global civil warfare, which is very much this condition. If anybody else, you know, would like to say something or else, you know, it's nicer when more people talk. Or otherwise, you know, I can go back to the structure.
I have one or 2 points I could make. Hello. But what I liked about the paper that we had to read, it was quite good because, again, like, particularly it's good that you've clarified the shift that you've had since writing this paper, because I've found in reading Foucault's writings on biopower and biopolitics, this idea that what biopower is it's this internalization of these deeply mutational, emerging neoliberal structures. It can sometimes read as a little bit defeatist, maybe, or something like that. So like this trying to update it. And of course, as you say in the paper, this is being written in the end of the 70s. But two words that you've mentioned since you've that I've written down here since you've been speaking, and these are the things that when we talk about social media, it's really, really, really complicated, because we have these, these extremities of pros and cons. And you've mentioned this word embeddedness, and then this word entanglement. And so the embeddedness of these things seems to be an absolute positive. These technologies have emerged, and these are literally it's the beginning of what I know, a new wave of cybernetics, which really is a different type of internalization of these machines. And this is what you said again at the beginning in terms of smartphones are breaching the space that we live in. But then what you mentioned about was, and this comes back to the platform governance thing, because this is where I think maybe there's a shift and something that we can think about when we're trying to maybe, I don't know, this is problematic to say update Foucault's writings, because that's not what we're trying to do exactly, but to reinterpret them as in what's happening now. But this idea of platform governance, I mean, is the problem then, because you said that obviously you've noticed like Facebook's shift in terms of moving away from news and links to more user-generated content, and obviously like people uploading videos of their family on Sunday and stuff like that. The algorithms are giving preference to that. But I mean, is the problem then, is it not the content? Because as you've said, like there's this thing that civil society is not a primary or immediate reality, but it does not mean it has no reality. And if civil society is it's not it's not humanitarian, okay? So if it's not that, then I think the problem is not necessarily the content. I mean, there's obviously some complex political ramifications when we start thinking about bots spreading fake news links and things like that. But those are like, that's maybe a drop in the ocean, because maybe the problem isn't the content. The problem is the architecture. It is the algorithms that are dispersing these things. I mean, that's just something that I wrote down, because I think that this is something to think about. I mean, you talked about, and I'll ask you again, who wrote this this effective networks that you mentioned? Tiziana, you mentioned effective networks.
Oh yeah, it's Jodie Dean. She uses kind of Lacan.
Okay. Yeah, because I think, I mean, the networks are, I mean, this is where the interest that these things become capital. It's not in the content so much as the social relations that are around them. Okay, so that's the architecture, and the algorithms that deliver these things to you. The content doesn't seem to be so much as important, and it doesn't seem to be the area for improvement so much as the means by which these things get to you. So that's why I would say that while people seem to get in these frenzies over bots posting links to things that are false and who gets them and things like that, surely it's the actual delivery point that is the problematic issue here. Because I do think that, I mean, in particular, we're going to see this with the increase of VR, because, I mean, all this time that we spend looking at these screens, whether they're smartphones or iPads or whatever, I mean, this is going to be a massive shift in terms of when VR really takes that iPhone moment and becomes paramount, you know? And then we become even more shifting towards, you know, this is when the embedded and the entanglement really comes together, I think. So yeah, I mean, that's, I'm kind of losing my point a little bit. But yeah, I mean, in terms of this idea of effective networks, surely then the problem is the algorithms and not the content. And is that something that we should be thinking about more? Or
I think that's how they're thinking about it. They're thinking about it like that. So, okay, the problem is the algorithms. If we fix the algorithm, we can fix everything. You know, we can find it. If you can find the right combination, if you can tune this machine, if you can find the right way to kind of to use the dial so that people won't have the fake news will be automatically fact-checked and expelled from the network, and people will be exposed gradually to kind of variety of opinion, then, you know, things are going to cool down a little bit and people are going to come back from Instagram. Maybe, or maybe they don't care. Maybe eventually they will just drop it, and just because Instagram is just images, and images are soothing, and words are inflammatory like that. You know, again, they can be used in all kinds of ways, right?
I mean, we're also, we have to, you know, I mean, this is a kind of a trite point, but I mean, we do have to think about what we're trying to anticipate what the next wave of these social networks is going to be, because, you know, in the same way that, you know, in 20 or 30 years time, Bitcoin's not going to be the main cryptocurrency. Facebook isn't going to be the main social network. So, I mean, these things are not inevitably, but they're, well, actually, no, it's difficult to say that they're going to collapse, because obviously, I mean, and again, never mind to talk about, okay, Facebook is a social network, but we look at something like Amazon. Amazon isn't really a delivery company. It's not the company that gets me my books as quick as possible. It's something that's so much more expansive now. And Facebook's going in that direction as well.
So that's why I say it's interesting to see something limited, like, you know, what happened between 2005 and 2017, right? Which has been the kind of the parable in the, you know, it went from nothing to like huge, and now it's starting to come down. What happened there? That's why I think that, yeah, the algorithms are the solutions. They identify that as a solution, but maybe the problem is what Mo was saying before, right? Maybe the problem is that something like Facebook represents the telos of this notion of civil society that we've been living with. There's been this transactional reality that Foucault talks about, and that, you know, it's been, we always believed was something kind of benign. No, civil society is about civil, right? It's about a space of where public opinion is formed and expressed, and you know, it's something through which society itself gets better and better. And instead, maybe it was not like that to start with. You know, maybe this kind of civil war or this hostility that was at the core of the liberal concept of civil society is actually coming to fruition in social media. And maybe that's going to be the end of civil society, as far as we know it. You know, that's also another possibility, as something that is not going to survive a phase of globalization, if we still want to talk about it in terms of globalization, which is not just about, you know, kind of commodities, even cultural commodities being circulated, but it's about people finding themselves in a global space. In a global space, which is kind of transnational, even post-national, yes.
But that's really interesting then, in terms of like the globalization, because as you mentioned, like Facebook can't infiltrate China, right? They have their own social networks set up. And it's interesting then, because you know, if you look at Africa as an example, as a place which is receiving massive amounts of development from China, or sorry, it is massive amounts of development from China. So I mean, that's an interesting idea if you think about Facebook as its own computationally dispersed state. It has 2 billion members. Yeah. And then that's in competition now with China, which is an actual, you know, geographical state. And they're both in this race for Africa, which is, you know, this, you've got one country, which is China, which is taking a very non-Western type of colonization through actual long-term development of these places. Because I mentioned this, and I'm not too read up on it, what is Facebook's involvement in terms of development in Africa? Or did you mention that, or did you say that they were trying to do that and they couldn't?
They were trying, you know, it was the obvious outlet for growth for them, because there are a lot of people in the rest of the world. They can get into Russia, that's the other one, VKontakte, they got their own Facebook clone. They cannot get into China, so Africa was the next step for them. But then now Facebook is like Europe and the United States mostly, and North Africa, you know, Middle Eastern as well. And this kind of model, again, of civil society that's embedded. You know, it's what then the kind of the social network is made of. I think it's coming to fruition there. So yeah, it's possible that the demise of social media will be the demise of a notion of civil society.
Now, Tiziana, seeing this sort of like upheavals of the last couple of years, particularly like winter of 2016 and forward. This quote by Walter Benjamin from The Work of Art comes to my mind a lot as sort of like another way maybe to look at social media. And it's a very famous one. Everybody in the class probably knows it, but I'm just going to like post it to the sidebar and read it. It says that basically the bottom line, even if we don't like read it, the growing proletarization of modern man and the increasing formation of masses are two aspects of the same process. Fascism attempts to organize the newly created proletarian masses without affecting the property structure which the masses strive to eliminate. Fascism sees its salvation in giving these masses not their right, but instead a chance to express themselves. This is sort of like where I sort of like see the affinity, right? The masses have a right to change property relations, but fascism seeks to give them an expression while preserving property. So to me, this tension between sort of like the ability to express, but not ability to transform political economy is also at the heart of the entropy.
That's interesting. Interesting, yes. Because the other thing that, I mean, it's very much also in the hyper-social book I'm working on, and which can also link somehow to what Benjamin said. It's also the fact that at the same time when Foucault was delivering his lectures at the Collège de France, Jean Baudrillard was publishing The End of the Social, In the Shadow of the Silent Majorities, or The End of the Social. And he was talking about social entropy, also in similar terms, saying that Foucault and his attempt to resuscitate the social by looking at marginals and the minorities, sexual minorities, and all kinds of minorities was doomed because the social was about to be absorbed by its simulation, and the simulation of the social was the hyper-social, where, again, people were going to be able to express themselves as much as they wanted, but it was not going to make any difference because it was going to just be this kind of orbital circulation of models. So you can look at the end of it. That's why I use the term hyper-social. The End of the Social, Baudrillard. But the end of that, for Baudrillard, could only be catastrophe. This process of absorption that he talks as the hypersocial.
So is that the name of the publication, The End of the Social?
Yes, it's the second part. It's called In the Shadow of the Silent Majorities, or The End of the Social. Right. And he talks about the hypersocial there as the hyper-realization of the social. The absorption of the social by its simulation. And it's like, it's also about social entropy, about the reduction of the social to a utility. While Benjamin was talking about the kind of the end trajectory of that, giving people not access to property, but just to express them as fascism, Baudrillard was talking about this kind of social utility, which was going to just, keep everything circulating. I think, Benjamin was probably more right than Baudrillard from this point of view. You're right. But the point you made about the kind of access to property brings me back to something else that was happening, right at the time when social media started taking over the internet, which was all the talk by the Silicon Valley crowd, the kind of wired people in the mid-2000s about online collectivism and digital socialism. So if you look at 2004 and 2005, you find a whole the kind of Wire magazine, online, all the people who were like part of the kind of Silicon Valley culture were really big into this idea that the new kind of internet was all about the resurgence of socialism and online collectivism. So the talk was about open source, Wikipedia, crowdsourcing, peer-to-peer commons-based social production. So right before the kind of social became absorbed, this kind of term became absorbed by social networking platform, you had all this talk about a new socialism coming online, with the, the polarization of debate between those who thought it was good things. Let's think about Chris Anderson publishing "Here Comes Everybody." Again, Kevin Kelly talking about online collectivism, digital socialism. Jaron Lanier objecting, saying, that this was all a bit too much, that you needed you had no quality because everybody was making things and was sharing things. So it's interesting that right before this kind of new corporate wave of corporate-owned social media, all the talk in this environment was about socialism and the kind of the possibility that the internet was going to turn into a socialist medium. And this lasted such a short time, right? This kind of talk about digital socialism and online collectivism. In those circles, of course, you still have a big investment on the part of the left online into notion of the commons, the common as an alternative. So I know that Mo has been talking about taking over Facebook and then kind of making it into kind of shared property. Blockchain technology might actually allow to do that. Eventually, it might be possible that if the company does not, it loses its kind of edge and it starts losing engagement, they might actually choose some kind of technologically enabled kind of shared property through blockchain. We don't know about that, but it's interesting that when right after, around the same time, when you were at all this talk about digital socialism and like everybody was going to be able to produce their own content, and it was all about everything about common-based peer production, you had one of the first applications of something that was going to become really crucial to social media use of social media, which is the use of graph theory. The use of graph theory as a kind of computational technique to process big data. So right at the moment when you have all this talk about digital socialism, right at the moment where social networking platforms are about to take off, physicists using the tools, the mathematical tools of graph theory, start to process data harvested through hyperlinked, through crawling hyperlinks on the World Wide Web, similar to the way in which Google kind of organizes its search engine. And they start pulling out of data about hyperlink structure of the World Wide Web, something like an underlying social structure of the web. And then, we can, I'll show you later how this is kind of migrated into social networking later on. They started talking, using the data generated from hyperlinks between websites before social media. They started arguing that the social structure of the web was not egalitarian at all. So if socialism was about egalitarianism, was about everybody being able to participate, according to the reading that Silicon Valley had given of this, data processed through graph theory started arguing that it was not equality that was being produced, but concentrations, that they were like rankings, very much the way in which Google returns your search results query, and they start identifying by means of hyperlink data processing, something like the social laws, what they call the social laws of the web. So they start saying that networks do not produce egalitarian society, but they are ruled by a series of physical laws which are applied to the social, such as small world effects. So the fact that after a certain amount of links among sites, distances collapse. So kind of things spread a lot more quickly to more people. That you have things like power laws operating in social networks, even before social media, in the web as a social network of documents, and that there are like big heads which tend to accumulate through network effects all the power. So that in every network where the social start acting as a kind of iterative mechanism, what you find is that you got a few nodes which get all the links, and the majority of nodes who get only a few links, and that's how networks produce value as a kind of ranking between the kind of few huge nodes and infinite multiplicity of small nodes. And I think that's really interesting as well. They at the same time, right at the moment where these media are starting to emerge, you have this kind of mathematical treatment through graph theory of the hyperlinked structure of the web, and out of that you start getting statements saying, no, this is not a socialist medium. It's a medium that produces automatically inequalities, and then you have the medium shows something like social laws operating on the internet, which is something that you find again and again and again later in the way in which social networks again are said to produce influencers. People like accumulate a lot of influence, while the majority of people only has this feeling that they have a potential access to a mass audience, but in reality they have very little influence. So this is something that again, I'll pick up on again later. But if you have some questions, I can maybe.
So I'm just so eager to like interact with you because it's such an amazing thing to have you. So I upload that, and please, people, don't share it because Urbanomic is a very small publishing company. I shared with everyone a copy of To Live and Think Like Pigs by a French mathematician and philosopher, Gilles Châtelet, as one of the readings that you might want to consider as we talk about social networks. And for him, basically this cybernetic society that he saw coming from like the late 70s on with the advent of computation and statistics is a form of sort of like nature taking its revenge on Reformation and Enlightenment. So basically sort of like laws of physics and nature kind of returning with a computer and trying to push back against those sort of like principles of like egalitarianism advocated by the Enlightenment. And he basically called the network society a counter Reformation movement. But for him, it's very much about sort of like the return of nature, the return of not nature necessarily, but basically a kind of like nature, but also like a return of nature that then turns a society into a farm.
Yeah, I would like to read that.
So it's actually it's actually part of the stuff that I'm asking people to read for my sessions. And I can send it to you. But yeah, so what you're saying here is very similar to kind of like and he wrote the book in 1997 and committed suicide in 1998. So it's sort of like it has affinities with his idea. You're saying like networks are kind of like run on laws of physics, right, and mathematics.
That's what scientists start to say, and that's why I'm really immersed, and I can get my head out of the kind of history of social network analysis and the history of the social network as a scientific object, because it's very much about that. Like today for this lecture, I was rereading Radcliffe Brown. I don't know if you ever heard of Radcliffe Brown. I'm asking Terence and the students and Margaret, I don't know if you ever heard, and Leonardo, have you ever heard of Radcliffe Brown? I'm gonna write it here. Radcliffe Brown is the social anthropology. Okay, good. He's a social anthropologist operating mostly in the 1920s and 1930s. right? He's the founder of social anthropology, British social anthropologist, and he's considered, you know, the kind of introduce, you know, the social network as a metaphor to talk about social structure. So if you read handbooks of social network analysis, let's say like John Scott, who's like a major like ex-colleague at the University of Essex, and is the author of a handbook of social network analysis for SAGE. If you look at him, he will tell you straight away that social network analysis developed out of a metaphor used by British anthropologist Radcliffe Brown to talk about the structure of primitive societies. So, and if you read what it doesn't tell you, and you have to read Radcliffe Brown to get that, you know, things like he wrote Structure and Function in Primitive Society. Also, so Scott says that Radcliffe Brown was using these textile metaphors to talk about the structure of society. So he was talking about the fabric of society, he was talking about the web of society, and then he started using the term the network to talk about the underlying structure of the primitive societies that anthropologists were studying in Africa and Aboriginal societies. So what John Scott doesn't tell you is that Radcliffe Brown and social anthropology conceived of anthropology as a branch of the natural sciences. So it was like biology and physics for him. So he was not a kind of a real, you know, you belong to the humanities. So again, it's another thing I was rereading these days because it's very interesting. It was a branch of the natural sciences, so it was closer to the physical and biological sciences, which studied the forms of association and the varieties or diversity of structural systems. So it was the study of social form that it was talking about. So there is this legacy of social network, of kind of social anthropology.
It would be great if you give us the name of the book so one of us can download it and add it to the classroom. The original, of course.
The shame that can I, oh look, I got it here. It's online, so I downloaded it myself, Structure and Function in Primitive Society, but especially you can download this essay, this talk he gave to the, it was the presidential address to the Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, and it's called On Social Structure. And you can do a Google search and you will find it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, on social structure. So this kind of, yeah, this application of the law of physics, this application of the law of physics to society, this notion that society obeys some kind of physical laws, is something that you find at the very beginning of what people who are kind of practicing social network analysis describe as the genealogy of their field. Yeah. So this is the part that I can get my head out of, and which is slowing me down a lot, but I think there's something really interesting in this, and it's the genealogy of social network analysis. So this kind of these models, you know, they become a medium, because a social network used to be a kind of representation, a way to study social forms, which believed social forms could be studied in the same way that kind of physics or biology studied the physical laws and biological forms. You find it very much, you know, within this model. So yeah, it goes together with what you said about Chatelet, Mohammed.
Thank you. Sorry, I interrupted. Maybe you want to continue.
Go ahead. If you have other questions, I'll be, or other things that you would like to bring up.
I have a question, but I'm gonna leave it to closer to later.
Okay, so I will go back to Radcliffe Brown and the idea that the genealogy of the social network, which is, again, something that I'm pretty obsessed with. So to anticipate it, what I've become obsessed with is this idea that is the title of this seminar, that the social network, the genealogy of the social network precedes that of computer networks. So social networks come before computer networks, they even come before communication networks. And the genealogy of social networks takes us back to the biopolitics of the 1930s. It takes us back to the study of primitive societies, aboriginal societies, but it also takes us to the study of the others within of contemporary society. You find sociometrists, again, maybe next time we can talk about it in more detail. You find prisons, you find schools, you find factories, you find all kind of, all kind of really interesting institutions at the origin of social network analysis. But this is, again, something that we can go back to later. So to go back to what I was saying before, you have this point where the claims that the internet is a social medium, a socialist medium, potentially, which allows people to have control on the means of production and to express themselves, to produce a new kind of socialist society, starts being contested using the evidence produced by physicists deploying graph theory to analyze the underlying social structure of hyperlinking on the World Wide Web. And this is a big thing because you could have kind of, again, analysis of data flows between computers or, you know, packets, switching, but you needed the World Wide Web, you needed the graph, you need the hyperlink for this kind of concept of hierarchies and underlying social laws to be generated. And this is where the kind of the idea that the internet was a kind of egalitarian medium started being exposed, also using this kind of evidence. So the use of graph theory and social network analysis, because graph theory, which I will return to later, maybe next time, it might be too much for now, has been developed fundamentally by social scientists, not so much by mathematicians or physicists to start with, but graph theory has been the branch of topology that has been developed the most specifically by sociologists and social scientists. And then, you know, it would be from this that, you know, it will be taken on by kind of social media as their infrastructure. So this idea that the social laws of the web are actually not socialist, but produce inequalities, they kind of burst the idea of this kind of internet socialism, right to the point where kind of social media, social networking platforms, to be more specific, started to take off in the mid-2000s. And here there is another bunch of statements which, again, I found really interesting, which are those which were issued by the so-called net critics. We know that there is this tradition of net critique, internet critique, that developed starting from the 1990s through mailing lists. I'm thinking about NetTime, but also thinking about Rhizome, the whole milieu of like mailing lists in the 1990s, which is where the kind of discussion, a critical discussion around the internet was happening, also had a very strong reaction to the rise of social networking platform, and before that to the idea of the Web 2.0. So what they started saying was not so much, you know, of course they were pointing out to the kind of inequalities which were revealed by network physicists, but especially you start getting a lot of criticism aimed at social networking platforms, specifically from people like Gert Lovink, Ned Rossiter, Jody Dean, which argued that the problem with this, the social, which was embodied in this platform, was exactly that it was a social that had been deprived of any relationship with socialism. So you see that for this kind of this brief moment where this link between socialism and the internet was being established is immediately broken, on the one hand, by the kind of evidence of network physicists, and on the other hand, by the rise of social networking platform. And what you see is that the focus of this critique, especially by net critics, who have always been really interested in software and the kind of the way in which the software works together with patterns of ownership, they started saying that the use of the term social by this platform indicated that something has happened, the kind of corporatization, the marketization, the becoming corporate and capitalistic of the internet was taking as its target specifically the notion of the social. So all this happens very quickly. So it happens in something like 2 or 3 years. So what they all say, I'm thinking about Gert Loving, you can read that. What is the social of social media? You find that online, or you can look at Jody Dean, Society Doesn't Exist. A lot of this stuff. You can look at, that's slightly different. So they also quoted at the beginning of Securing the Social, Will Davis. Will Davis talk about a social compatible with neoliberalism, right? In this article he wrote for Open Democracy. So you start seeing how all the critiques that are being directed at this early kind of development of social networking platforms take issue with the term social itself. So they say that social media are the embodiment of a new idea of social, that the internet has always been social to start with, but social networking platforms were about something else. What they were doing is they were reducing the social to a graph. The social media, social networking platforms were kind of eradicating the socialism from the social. The social networking platform were taking away solidarity, the class, everything that the social is signified when kind of people like Thatcher or Reagan thought that it was a really bad term, or Hayek to start with, right? It was really bad term, that you shouldn't be using it, that it didn't mean anything, there was a vague notion, that there was a kind of colonization of the term social. There was a symptom of the fall of socialism, that this was possible after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and that it was a kind of capitalist enclosure of the social, that they had reduced the social to a graph. And you know what a graph is, right? A graph is the kind of usual representation on network. It's the mathematical term for the very familiar diagram of nodes and links. That's technically a graph. That is a mathematical representation which uses a simple system of notation of points and lines, also known as nodes and links, also known as edges and vertices. This kind of representation, the social graph, this graph had become the new image of the social, and that this was an extremely reductive image of the social, because it reduced the social to just relationships between individuals, which postulated that society as such did not exist. So it was a reduction of the social to individualism. So they looked at social networking platforms, and what they saw was a kind of a representation of the social which completely destroyed and evacuated all connection between socialism and the term social as such. So it's a really interesting set of statements.
So basically society simulation via the graph is absorbing the social via the graph.
Baudrillard, yeah.
If you just amend it, we put the word via the graph in his sentence. And then the tool is the graph. The tool is reconceptualizing what social is via the sort of like the epistemology of the graph.
Yes, that was the first thing the net critique picked up on. Say, what's happening here? What's happening is that you have a new representation of the social, a data object, which has become the kind of model of the social embedded, again, in this infrastructure, and it's constructing, it's kind of constructing a new statistical and empirical object. And since society, our understanding of society from the 19th century is very much dependent on the statistical means of constructing societies and empirical objects. So if you use statistics before, and now you're using kind of the social graph, you're using the social network, you have something very serious, which is you have a kind of colonization by means of kind of math of the term social, the meaning of the social, but also the very ways in which the social functions as an empirical object, which eradicates all sense of solidarity, class, or sense of kind of social structure in the kind of Marxist, materialist tradition of the world, and the reduction of the social to a collection, a bunch of individuals and their friends. So this is a reaction of the net critique. Jodi Dean makes a slightly different argument. She also uses the graph to say that the graph is just an ideological representation of society as a kind of collection of relationships among individuals. But she also says that this representation is not just something that that neoliberalism is responsible for, but it's also something that kind of postmodern political theory is responsible for. So she kind of makes the name of Laclau and Mouffe to say, look, they also argue that the social is just an assemblage which doesn't have any reality beyond the relationships that compose it. And then she also kind of blames Bruno Latour, version of actor network theory, for also taking the collective, the sense of collective and the common out of the social, and reducing it to a bunch of associations between individual nodes. So these are, like, I think, two very exemplary papers. Will Davis is slightly different, and I'm gonna be joining Will and Nick again on Friday at the Theory, Culture and Society for a workshop on neoliberalism. So it would be good to talk to them about this, because Will Davis also made a connection between kind of the social graph, the social network as a representation of society, and the neoliberalism. But, because he's a very shrewd and acute critic of neoliberal thinkers who actually done the work of going to the archive and looking at all the statements, his argument is a lot more nuanced, because he's basically saying that in the article, in the essay, but also in a later article, which I'm going to pick up for you, where he develops the arguments that he put up in Open Democracy. So it's Will Davis. And look at it again. The article on Open Democracy was called Neoliberalism and the Revenge of the Social, where he argues that social networks, social media facilitate a new form of state power, that neoliberal government no longer places quite so much emphasis on the market, but because that before neoliberalism defined itself in opposition to the very idea of the social, and then now they found a model of the social which is more compatible with their requirement. And then in another article, which I'm gonna get the reference for you and put it here. Right. The Return of Social Government, from Socialist Calculation to Social Analytics, which he published in the European Journal of Social Theory just in 2015, where he says, actually, it makes a slightly different argument. He's saying that social media are giving not just neoliberalism, a version of the social which satisfies their requirements. So they should be performative, they should be measurable in a certain way. But it also maybe introduces something new, which is a a kind of a form of government which is aimed at well-being and happiness. You know, it's got this book on happiness, which I haven't read, but apparently it's really good. So that is constructing the kind of a social, I said, tool to measure a well-being, so to guarantee the kind of social order. So the social network starts attracting attention by critics, especially the form, the social graph, as something that indicates the mutation, which is not just about social media, is about to take place, a mutation which allows a new image of the social to emerge, which is incompatible with socialism, while it's compatible with neoliberalism, even if it forces it to change, somehow also emphasis, and that the kind of the core of this new image of the social is absolutely the social graph, right?
Okay, so I'm gonna try to make sense of this by asking or proposing that. So basically one way to look at it is saying, like, okay, from the point of view of the network administrator, society is already conceived of as the social graph, right? But that's not how member of this virtual society, who are also member of the real society, look at social media, because they're not consciously aware of the fact that how graph is pitting them against each other, grouping them, separating them, connecting them, all that, right? But nevertheless, this awareness of society can be treated as a social graph is in the long run impacting how these members of the real society, via their participation in social media, will eventually sort of like act with less imperative towards socialism and more towards whatever status quo it is that social media is also sort of like bringing about by interacting with the existing neoliberalism. Because as you said, neoliberalism is also changing as a result of social media.
Yeah, the argument has two sides. On the one hand is a new mathematical, empirical, statistical representation of the social is available to neoliberalism, which it suits them, and it allows them to develop new forms of social government. So these are also the years where the kind of conservative government launched this kind of big society initiative. So it gives them a way to kind of manage society, which didn't have before. And on the other hand, it also has a kind of effect of subjection on people who use it, because people who use it, even if they're not aware of it, they're also starting to think about the social as Loving put it, a graph of my contacts, a blabber on and on. The social for them is going to be just that. The social is going to be about their group of friends on social media. And also the term of the social is going to be redefined in individualistic terms. So I think they have this kind of two arguments going on there. And I think that pretty much the kind of critique of social media is still there. It's still at that point, right? It's a reductionist understanding of the social. It's a reductionist model, and what is worse, it's not just a model. It's actually become a social infrastructure. So people are starting to think about themselves socially more in terms of the social capital they accumulate, in terms of the number of friends they have, in terms of the number of the likes they accumulate, and this is what the social has been reduced to, the simulation, right? Whose purpose is just to keep circulation of these affective quantities, which are number of likes, number of shares, things that one likes, where the like button, the plugin, kind of collapses together the kind of belief and desire. I can like something because I agree with it, or I can like something because I want it, right? So there's kind of this collapse of the two sides of the social affect in a kind of third sense in the plugin. So that's another part, you know, that I'm putting together, the way in which net critics reacted to the emergence of this new sign, which is the social graph. And here, if you want, you can interrupt me, because then I'm going to start talking about how Facebook itself introduced the social graph between 2007 and 2009, 2010, when they presented it at the F8 convention as what they call, their infrastructure, their engine, and what made it work.
Now, okay, before we go there, I just wanted to maybe the last question, if you allow me. What I would like to ask is, like, when collection of choices and data goes beyond social media, when you liking something or you choosing something happens in the actual interaction with the world through and collected, the information what is collected through Internet of Things and all sorts of other ubiquitous in the background data collection.
Yeah.
So even if you leave social media, there's still the social graph, because social graph is being formed by your actions in the real society that no longer, it might look like organic and cool, but there's sensors everywhere which are observing you and are collecting your sort of likes and interactions with humans and objects. So in a way, there is no going back outside. There might be a sort of exit from Facebook, but increasingly there will be no exit from the social graph, because social graph is being sort of new methods for drafting it is being implemented or put in place, right?
Yes. I think that's the next development. That's a development that happened, but that happened first through the mediation of social media. I think my argument about the hypersocial right now is that it's got these two sides, and that, if I talk a little bit about Facebook introduction of the social graph, it's exactly that. It's on the one side, it becomes a medium of communication. So the social becomes a medium of communication as such. It becomes a kind of informational milieu. And on the other side, it becomes a computational machine. So it's used to spread information, and it's used to process it at the same time. So, and this is kind of developed from this introduction of Facebook has been the company that articulated it more clearly and developed it, and then it's been spreading to the Internet of Things through protocols such as the Open Graph Protocol, because the Open Graph Protocol, I'm anticipating a little bit, but it's already in the paper, so you know about that. Took the social graph to the next step. So the social graph is no longer just about relationship between individuals, but it's relationship about anything, where individuals and their properties, but also things can have their own graph associated to them, and have their own properties. So you can be a property of the thing you liked in kind of data terms, as much as what you liked is a property of you, right? In terms of this double attribution, so it's spread as a computational medium beyond.
But we can fast forward. But I think we should just maybe we should get into the other part of your lecture, and then we can maybe wrap it up later, because there's a lot of interesting things to say, and I'm sure other people also might want to participate, especially Leonardo, who hasn't spoken yet. But go ahead. I'm gonna
Okay, Margaret hasn't spoken yet. Can hear it. Yeah, okay, so then I went and looked at, okay, everybody was saying, oh, the social graph is evil. The social graph is the hypersocial. It's Baudrillard's hypersocial is the sign that's coming to replace reality. The social has become this kind of simulation that you get through this sign. I said, okay, let's see, let's see how this concept was introduced. So we moved to 2007. 2007, Facebook is a new company that just moved their offices to Palo Alto. They are looking, they're not, they will not have the IPO for a while, but they're still looking to get their company established, and they need to do a little bit of PR, right? And the PR happens through these conventions that they have, not so regularly at the beginning, 2007, 2008, then they sometimes miss a year. But the first kind of Facebook convention, which is in 2008, is the convention where Zuckerberg introduces the social graph. and introduced it's a kind of a big thing, it's a kind of it's this San Francisco warehouse, where it kind of walks on the stage. There's no video of that event, but there is still around the internet quite a lot of reactions and kind of logs that people wrote at the time, and then the whole reaction of the press, including The Economist, all the blogs they were writing about the Silicon Valley. The social graph is a kind of meme in Silicon Valley culture from 2007 and 2010, because what happens is that again they make this big statement in 2007 where they say, what we have that nobody has, that is going to revolutionize the web and is going to completely change it. Our main asset is the social graph. So what is the social graph? They say they're not using the term social network. They use the term social graph because they want to emphasize that they are a technology company. They are not a media company, but they are actually a company that is interested in technological innovation. They're a science-driven company. They say the strength of Facebook is that we're using a social graph. We're using this representation, or they don't use the term representation. It's our infrastructure. It's our Intel inside. It's our engine. It's what makes it work. We found a way to organize the flow of information on the web, which is new, which was not there before, and which is exactly, this representation of society as a network of individuals, where, I'm Mark, and I'm friend with this and with that person, and this is what defines me. I'm defined by my friends. I'm defined by the things I like. They will come a little bit later. And they say this is absolutely revolutionary. There's a series of statements that are made in that talk, which can reconstruct again from logs. So what he says is, they say, because also Sky is manager, is that the social graph is what makes information go viral. That you have, through the social graph, you can target information in such a way that it will circulate, it will reach your target much better, it will spread much more efficiently in relation to the old web, where you had to go from hyperlink to hyperlink. Now information spreads directly through the social graph, through social individuals. It's the infrastructure and their major asset, and it represents the largest social data set in the world with all kinds of applications. They say that their competitive advantage over other entities on the web is that they can give developers through their API, to the application programming interface, they can give everybody access to the asset, that developers and programmers can get direct access to their social graph and spread their applications and their products much more effectively through this medium. And at the same time, the data set that you get from that, you can use it to generate all kinds of applications. So they come out with this idea that their main asset is a social graph, and it spreads to the Silicon Valley. It spreads through all the blogs. People start blogging about it, saying things like, The Economist saying that Zuckerberg is acting like some Renaissance map makers. He thinks that he's found a way to map the social. He found a way to actually have a kind of data, to construct a data object which will give you access to the structure of the social that you never had before. But then they say, but what kind of use you make of it? Okay, you got this data set, who people are friends with, but then isn't it like an address book? Isn't it something that also Google's got through Gmail? Isn't it just a kind of a hyped up version of the address books? Other people say, well, there's not just one social graph, there's several social graphs. How do we make all these different social graphs compatible between them? What kind of applications you can use? And actually, Google invests in its own social graph initiative, trying to go into competition with Facebook for a while, saying that they will contribute to construct an open social graph that will not just belong to one company and that everybody can use. In the end, the killer application of the social graph will be the Open Graph protocol, which leads us exactly to what Mo was talking about. That is the fact that you have a way to map a relationship between things, not just between individuals, but also between things. So if in 2007, it's all about relationship between individuals, by 2009, 2010, with the introduction of the Open Graph protocol, the graph becomes about relationship between people and things, and between things. So it becomes about reinventing and expanding semantic web technologies in such a way that allows you to have access to this proliferating map of relations, which are social without being, in the first place, even about individuals anymore, because it becomes just about connections and correlations. And this is more or less the source of this kind of big data explosion that we have today. Because once you start introducing in the graph not just the relationship between individuals and their friends, but also the things that they like and they share, that you have a massive explosion of possible and potential correlations. Right? So you are at the point now where these data can be used by people like Alex Pentland at MIT to rejuvenate the notion of social physics to big data, right? Saying that the data generated by these protocols, this application, open up a world of possible correlations out of which you can identify new types of laws and patterns, which will actually allow you to do all kinds of things, such as reach your targets in terms of if you want to sell something, but also find out underlying trend, find out how to avoid things. So the social graph, further than just being a representation of the social, which is all about individuals, turns out to be this modality of constructing, kind of harvesting information, which allows for the proliferation of possible correlation, which is more or less, the kind of critique of big data. The kind of correlation between data is potentially infinite, that you don't know which correlations are meaningful anymore in this sense. But this is kind of what has happened when the social graph became part of the infrastructure, not just of social networking sites, but as Mo said, of the Internet of Things. And this is where I thought, let's go and look at where this sign, which on the one hand, net critics are accusing of being a reductionist version of the social, which reduces it to individual, and on the other hand, internet entrepreneurs and the kind of new social physicists argue is going to give you a kind of new hold on social laws. It's going to make you, it's going to allow you to manipulate kind of the social in new way and draw out a new correlation. Let's look at where this kind of the social graph is coming from. And this is where, if you want, possibly, I can save that for next week, on 2 weeks. I don't remember when we have our next class, Mo?
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe we can go back there and see why I got from the genealogy of the social graph, from graph theory in the 18th century to the 1930s, Gestalt, social psychology, to the social anthropology, to the formalization of the 1950s, to the extension of the kind of social network analysis to large population in the 1970s with Granovetter and the kind of 6 degrees of separation experiment, and why in this genealogy you can find this shift from a biopolitics, which is about the life, biological life, to biopolitics addressing social life as a kind of on the model of the social brain. And this is where I kind of I'm adding to next, and whether it's possible to retrieve from this image of the social also maybe a different theory of value, of social production, of social cooperation, which can be actually be of some use rather than just something that you denounce as being responsible for the reduction of the world to a set of individuals. But it's such an interesting story. That one, I think maybe deserves another lecture on its own. The kind of the last 100 years of social network analysis, basically, and how that diagram, the metaphor, became a diagram, and how the diagram has become a machine. And it's a kind of machine that is very much organizing social life, not just of humans, but also the social life of things. And what does that mean for us to engage with that in a way which is not just about, going back to the real relations of production as opposed to the ideology of the social graph. Okay, so we can have more of a discussion now if you want, or if there's any parts that you would like me to expand on.
Well, I'm thinking that if the walls of the social graph are ever like closing in on us, that would become the only arena where any agency could be possible. So how, only someone outside of this can say reject it and say don't interact with it, or like don't play with it. Because if you're inside, and if everyone's inside, because we're all connected and because sensors are everywhere in the world, there is no exterior to it. So if you're in, so any kind of transformation, new synthesis, challenge ought to be launched from the within, not from the outside.
Yeah, you are in the hypersocial. We are in the hypersocial. The social has been changed. The social has been changed. But it doesn't mean that you cannot refound on, I don't know, what Negri calls immanent communism on this basis. It's immanent communism and not just, a new kind of socialist planning, as some people are arguing, because some people are arguing that you can use it to inaugurate a new kind of socialist planning, or it's a kind of immanent. It's the immanent communism in the social graph. Is there a difference without separability in the social graph, as well as this kind of new social physics, these new laws of physics, these words of correlations without causes. There's going to be a really good article coming out in Theory, Culture, and Society. I blind refereed it, so I don't know who it is, but he's a top physicist for sure. The kind of world level, really good critiques of the kind of loss of causality in the correlation-driven digital data mining. Very interesting. So how can you hijack this? How can you get out of this also a different perspective on this notion of immanent communism? That's something that interests me.
Get out of it or transform it. Get out of it or transform it.
Just to put a point in there, I mean, this is, you said, how can you hijack it? I mean, that is one way of saying it, or as Mo said, you can transform it, because I think this is where the seems to be a missing of the, and this is again where I said that this idea of the social network and of the social graph as something is, and then you said this earlier, Tiziana, is like, why does it have to be this horror? I mean, it is this thing that can be a fruitful body of knowledge to learn from. Obviously, it didn't work right the first time, and this is why Facebook has become what it's become. But I mean, the idea behind it, I think it's the failure of the network. And when I say the social network, I do specifically mean things like Facebook and Twitter. Is that the idea behind it, which was, as you spoke about, this like early Silicon Valley utopian ideal of this, that technology can facilitate a type of distributed socialism. The problem was that instead of it, what happened was that the social media became this colonization of the body, this colonization of time. Yeah, absolutely a colonization of time. The colonization of the body is maybe more forthcoming. It's what the revolution this is going to be. But what it maybe should have been, and this is what it would have been if it was a distributed type of socialism, it would have been a colonization of time with epistemology rather than a colonization of time with dopamine feedback loops. So like, this is where the failure is. So what it was, or a colonization of time with effective engineering is what it became. So this idea of effective engineering is something that is a mass collection of data, which is a feedback, which also puts new data into the system, and then it collects big data, then feeds new data into the system prior to its interpretation of the previous data set.
On the one side. On the other side is this kind of milieu of entangled, it's not even longer communication. It's a complete, utter entanglement. You cannot separate from anything. You can no longer separate the whole kind of global space with its regions, with kind of separate societies. You know, there's something that comes up in Radcliffe Brown as well. At some point he says, okay, if you start mapping social structures like this, you know, what is society? He uses these examples. He says, is something about the Chinese village, and is a Chinese village a society, or is it part of the China Republic of China, which is a larger society? You know, where do you draw the boundaries around societies, which used to be the nation, right? It was a civil society, became society, and then became the nation, says Foucault. And then nations were opposed and different from other nations and the global space. But now, you know, there's that, and there's mobility, there's migration, there's global warming, there's kind of planetary Anthropocene. Everything has become kind of entangled. And the social graph is becoming the image of this unthinkable complexity. When Zuckerberg shows this image of the social graph, and it all looks like a neat, but that's complete, that's illusion. That's maybe the ideology, right? It's, you know, look, you can handle this. No, you can't. Because at some point, when you start, the connections start proliferating, all kind of visual representations, you know, you have to zoom out so much to get these laws of physics, these macro laws, so that you lose all the entanglement. So there is an attempt to discipline this new global space created by entanglement, to make it somehow manageable through computer simulation, and say, look, there's laws, we can intervene that. But the complexity of the numbers of connections is mind-blowing. Sorry, Terence, I can't hear you anymore.
Oh yeah, because I muted him. You have to unmute yourself. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, because I mean, okay, so the 2 points there, then as you said, like it's an absolute entanglement. Okay, so we move from the embedded to the entanglement. So as Mo said, this is the point of no return. Okay, and as this technology, well, there's two sides to it. As you know, as VR becomes a part of things, but also as things fade into the background. If there is a point of no return and there is this absolute entanglement, then maybe there's not an argument to try and work the thing from within, and to just, you know, as this, you know, to not to be too Silicon Valley about it, but like to exit it and just like build your own one. I mean, this, like, you know, there are more and more developers working, and as the problem is scale, isn't it? Because like the thing is, when you think about like peer-to-peer publishing and things like that, so Beaker Browser and all these, like this fetishization of decentralization, the problem is scale with these things. So this is, I mean, this is something that I'm looking forward to maybe learning about more in this class, is that you got on one side, you got the fetishization of decentralization, and all these things exist, but they don't really work because of scale. So maybe Mo, that's something that you can talk on a little bit more, because you do talk about, okay, well, let's just not hijack it so much as just, you know, augment it or something like that.
One last thing, that's what I thought was interesting about the notion of the diagram, and that's why I wanted to introduce it. Because if you, I mean, the whole point of Baudrillard's argument about the sign absorbing reality, right, is based on the idea that the sign is an icon, and so it imitates, it copies reality. But then if you go to kind of Peirce, right, and you look at the way he thinks about diagrams, which is close to Châtelet, so the diagram is something that it's about experimentation, it's about manipulation. The diagram is something that through a reduction allows you to experiment and play with things. And the history of graph theory is all about play and experimentation. You know, graph theory starts as a riddle. You know, the Königsberg bridges. How can I take a walk through the town where I can cross all the bridges just once and go through all of them? The salesman, the traveling salesman riddle. You know, the whole history of graph theory is about playing with the diagram. You play with the diagram, you experiment with it, you tease it. That's why Facebook keeps experimenting with it, right? They're playing with the social graph all the time, you know, through algorithms, by trying to manipulate it so as to make it fit. But this possibility of experimentation is something that everybody kind of does. Everybody plays. Mm-hmm. So how do you get from this level where it's a kind of individual type of play and it's kind of scattered to something that maybe it's more thought through and more become more of a kind of larger social experiment? Mm-hmm. Just on a side note, 2 days ago, Salvatore Iaconesi, I don't know if you know him. Salvatore Iaconesi is one of the members of the artist open source duo, and he became famous when he developed a brain tumor, and he wrote this book called The Cure. So he basically put his brain scan online and asked people to kind of talk about a cure for cancer, and it was a social experiment. But now what is done lately? 2 days ago, unfortunately, he almost had a heart attack, right? He almost had a heart attack. I mean, he got over his brain tumor, but you know, he was taken to the hospital because his heart was giving out. And what he did when he came back, because he's a hacker, engineer, artist, he realized that, you know, his heart attack, unlike, you know, his brain tumor, which was like conceived just as something that happened to him, he explicitly made a link between his heart attack and the kind of hyper social networking mode that he'd been involved with, right? Saying, you know, this life where you like continually social networks, you do projects, you do lectures, you're in a precarious working condition, so you have to do lots and lots of things. It's what led me to almost die again, you know, after the first time. So what he did, he used a kind of graph software package to make a map of his life, of his projects, of his connections, to try to understand what is it that he could get rid of. You know, what is it that he could, what were the things that he was really invested in and he wanted to, you know, to take care of, and what were the things that he needed to cut off. And so, and he talked about, the article is in Italian, but I'm sure it's going to be translated soon. And he talked about it as an experiment in computational psychology. So I think it's one of the first uses. This is very inventive, again, I've seen of you know, an engineer, an hacker, again, so maybe it's not for everybody, but it's interesting that he used the graph to kind of map what had been going wrong with his life and the reason why he got to the point where his body was failing him again, and kind of to use the graph to get some kind of control on the crazy social networking that we are all somehow engaged in, sometimes even against our will, even if you resist it, right? We keep... So that's an example of how the social graph is a diagram, and not just this evil sign that just takes over reality, but something that actually invites experimentation. And I'll shut up for now. Yeah.
I think Tegan and Margaret, if you want, it's time for you to intervene and have some words. Especially, I see Tegan is around because he's messaging on the side. Tegan. Oh, here we go. Margaret.
Margaret.
Please unmute yourself before speaking. Above the screen, you can turn the mic on. Do you see it? If you bring your mouse on the screen and you go above on the microphone, you click on it and then it unmute you. If you speaking. Okay. Okay, Tegan, maybe you want to say something before Margaret figure it out, or
all I was gonna say was I guess on the topic of like building anew, since like November or so, I've been starting to like teach myself web developing and different coding languages, working with like the mean stack to in some way like I guess like for me, I wanted to like work on actualizing like how Venegian speaks about communication networks and how he speaks about like the role of communication in both like revolutionary activity and like post-revolutionary society, and like the role of communication in like self-managed assemblies. And so like one big thing that I've been like dealing with, I don't have any questions, no, but
yes,
that's
yeah, it's interesting.
the only thing I really have to.
You're trying to, you're playing with a diagram.
Yeah, yeah.
With the code.
Yeah.
And what did you come up with? Why do you want to work on a social networking site?
I guess my like biggest thing has been kind of working within like the context of like a group and seeing how I could both both like center around like group activity and different ways that groups can interact with one another. So thinking about kind of the individual being like necessitated to belong to a group, but also kind of trying to build a platform for groups to be able to like spread information without hesitation, but also like through like secure messaging. So not just like public posts, but working with like different encryption software and trying to, I guess, like actualize a safe network for groups to spread information.
Yeah, because the big thing with these platforms again is that they are like corporate owned and so they don't feel safe, right?
Yeah, yeah.
All these, lots of people are getting kicked out all the time for posting things about Kurds. I mean, Facebook has got a big no policy about anything that mention the Kurdish question or positive Kurds. So the kind of the easiest way to get yourself kicked out is to put something about Kurds online. So that's an issue. So you're thinking about some kind of clandestine communication.
Yeah, I guess so.
Smartphones?
I'm sorry?
Smartphones based?
No, I've been trying my best to, I guess, implement a form of self-management within these groups, so such that no longer are you like relying on Facebook's algorithm to be able to like detect, oh, this is activity that like we won't allow, or
it's because then if you want it to go viral, because that's what you need, right? You need and it's become easier than before, for things to go viral. You'll have to play with the social graph as well. And it's not just a technical thing, it's a social thing. It's like, who's got to adopt this for this to spread? So it means that you need to do the coding and you need to kind of do the mapping at the same time to figure out where this should go so that it gets taken up. Because network effects, which are what locks people into these platforms, are powerful, but they're not all powerful, as we know. So yeah, that's interesting. You have to do this double work. It's the coding, but also figuring out who are the kind of the people who need to be brought in order for something to really grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Margaret, do you have a question? No? Okay. So I'm gonna ask another question, which is, there's an interesting case in particularly Facebook of closed and secret groups in which some sort of a similar thing as what Tegan was saying is already been taking place, and they're very popular, in which you sort of like select certain people that are going to sort of like like something or agree with a set of things, and then you kind of like close off. And you, of course, the data there is also part of the larger social graph of Facebook, because Facebook has the access to all that. But in terms of the impact on each other, it creates a different dynamic than posting something to your wall or amongst your friends.
Yes.
Not just because they're limited people, but because these people are like agree to enter that so-called room or something for a particular type of activity, or for a particular type of like specialization of view. So things don't get so much into this type of like social entropy. I mean, it might not even be interesting, but it has a different type of effect. I am in charge of a room that me and a friend of mine in Seattle started a while ago. I guess it goes back to 2013, and it's called the Boring Group. And the Boring Group is like, it's like a place to exercise being boring and enjoying boredom and enjoying boring things. I don't know if Margaret has been invited to the Boring Group or not, but I don't think any other people in the class are in the Boring Group. So we keep the number of participants under 250, because what happens is if your closed group is under 250, you can actually see who has seen the posts. But once the number goes over 250, only Facebook can see who've seen the post. So actually it allows for a little bit of like mapping and a little bit of understanding. So my job is always like, ask people, don't invite your friends. We're around 240, and that's what it should stay, because, and you know, the interactions are much more meaningful that way. And yeah, it's a very interesting experiment. And like, we have like very important diehard Boring Group members. You know, like one of them, I'm sure you know, Doug Henwood, the New York leftist journalist.
Yes.
And many other people, but people from all sorts of different fields. That their only qualification is like, I find them capable of enjoying boredom and not being not have too much anxiety over sounding boring. It's about kind of like getting over the fact that you are boring, and it's good to be boring, and boring is interesting. Very, very limited. There's not much political action or anything going on there. But for me, Boring Group is actually where I experiment with what I'm gonna do in the main Facebook, because that's where the graph is much more open. You know, because I see who sees it, who likes it, who comments it. It's very much more transparent. So. And I'm very selective about inviting people, and I kick people out all the time, because to keep the numbers under 240, I'm bringing for experiments.
That's exactly what's in the Facebook community, global community lecture of 2017. You say like groups is where it's at. You know, they've been focusing, they say, we're gonna focus all our developments on groups, because groups is the only area of growth that we are really seeing. So, you know, it's like, it's a kind of grassroots thing, but at the same time, the company has taken notice, and they're saying that they're going to make it the focus of their expansion politics, meaningful groups, because society is about belonging. That's what it says in the letter. Society is about belonging, and we want to become the infrastructure of global community, giving more power to groups, developing more tools for people to manage groups, giving tools to system admins, to the group admins, so they can actually kick out people quicker. And yeah, so they're investing on that. I had a big Facebook community meeting in Chicago in June, I think, June or May, where they invited like what they thought the best community leaders of these groups. So they're onto that. And that's why I think that, you know, what I read you saying from time to time on your main Facebook page, you know, that this infrastructure is going to have to be, the property of Facebook is going to be put into question, because it's just too useful. You know, a social graph with 2 billion people, a social media, it's just too useful, because the applications keep developing. So the kind of relationship with your list of friends and family is hitting a wall. You experimented with your personal social graph. You have exhausted it, because you know there's only so much you can do.
You know, I'm not sure if you're aware. There's a talk in Trump administration to basically nationalize the cellular phone signal. it's a new conversation, and it's all based around the fact that this is a security threat, and so like cellular networks are basically a national security objective. And the best way to secure them and make sure that they're safe for activity is for government to actually purchase and make one big network of one big sort of like a cellular data provider owned by the government of the United States, which is very interesting. The most right-wing government in the United States is proposing sort of like nationalizing telecommunication infrastructure, right? So I can see how the same logic can get applied to social graph. Where the government can come in and say, this is too useful, this is too good, we should just nationalize it. But then
they untangle it from all the global connections. That's more a problem. It's easier.
No, but if the government does that, it's basically about the ownership of the Facebook company, which is already US based and it's very easy to buy it or appropriate it, right? And then by doing that, it gives United States, if it does right now indirectly through NSA, secret dealings, and sort of like loopholes, indirect access. If the government owns Facebook, then it just gives direct access to the global social graph.
That'll be the end of Facebook, I suspect.
You think so?
Yeah, if it becomes too American, I think it's a global medium. Even if it's seen as American, people know it's American, but it doesn't, it's not perceived as such. It's perceived as transnational. I think it's a strength. I think that might be the end of it.
I guess it's much easier to nationalize a cellular network over a geography of America than to nationalize the social graph that Facebook owns.
Yeah.
Now, we're getting close to the end of the class, and I really wanted to basically talk about the reading that I want people to do for next week, but also half of the class kind of left early because of other engagements. So I have to also send this as an email, but I'm gonna actually do this because I don't know if you can join us, but if you can join us next week, feel free to join us because you won't be lecturing. You'll just be playing maybe a little bit of the role I played today. Okay. And the topic is my topic. I'm going to talk about that. My topic, I'm looking at it from the side that says, and this is a speculative topic, right? And I'm looking at it as a way of saying, what if the development of social network and the graph and the human entropy involved, in a way, it's part of the emergence of part of the singularity, part of the emergence of artificial intelligence in way by dumbing ourselves down. I mean, if you want to just simplify the argument, by dumbing ourselves down and by turning ourselves more and more into predictable beings through the social graph, we're actually allowing artificial intelligence to understand the human society. So basically, we're not even doing this for Facebook. This is not even for Facebook. We basically are doing it for the machine, for the large sort of a Grundroyce type of machine, right? So it's the machine that's actually gonna step over us as we kind of destroy our society, as we destroy our individuality through this. But we're enabling the rise of a alien / machinic intelligence out of this to just kind of go. So this is sort of my question and what my paper next week will kind of be about. And I have empirical examples. I would actually look at the impact of gay social media on gay sex and gay life. Most of it's going to be around that, but with a longer introduction about just general stuff. And then the text that I thought, the two that I really want people to read absolutely are the Eugene Thacker texts that I included. So the part 1 and part 2 of Eugene Thacker texts that are in the classroom would be good to read, but also
Eugene Thacker's texts. Which ones?
Oh God, I'm horrible with names. Just give me 1 sec, and I will tell you. It's from C Theory. It's called Networks, Swarms, and Multitudes.
Ah, yes, that one. Yeah.
You must know it.
Yeah, he came to Naples many years ago. I think it was around the time when he was writing that paper.
and also Chatelet's book, if people can read those two, because I think they resonate. And then I will do my presentation next week, same time, same place.
Okay, that's great. I'm gonna be in London, so I might join you from London then.
Yes, please join us, because it's wonderful to have you. And also, it will be like my style. I'm a little bit more tough. Is that I would, and I'm going to email this to people who are not in the class, but you guys that are in the class, which means Tegan and the rest, Terrence and Margaret, pick one of these texts, because I would ask you to speak at least 7 or 8 minutes about that text or the section of it that you focused and you read, right? Because it's important I want to hear what you have to say, because basically my presentations here are 2 papers. One of them is going to get published and translated in Swedish and come out in a collection on automation and social reproduction. And then the other one is part of a catalog for an exhibition that opens in Netherlands called Robot Love later on in September. And I really would appreciate your feedback, because I want to help me rewrite it. And of course I will credit people who help me when the papers come out. But yeah, so my style is kind of like that. And I will ask you to do a short, very short, 7, 8, 10 minutes presentation on one of the texts you read, or part of the text that you focused on, doing a close reading, right? So yeah, so basically that's what I ask you to do. Now, if you have anything else you also want to bring into the class and discuss, or anything, let's just prepare for it in the classroom. And I'm going to create a username password if Tiziana doesn't have one, so she can also.
Okay.
Because unfortunately, you can't come to the classroom with your own personal Gmail account. You have to sign out of that and sign into the New Center email, and then click on the classroom link, and then you're able to come to the classroom and interact with the people who are like maybe asking questions or like posting stuff, or if you have any documents you want to add. And also, I ask you, what would you like us to read for the 3rd week? Do you know? Okay, you can email it to me, and as long as you give people 7 days. So by next week today, we should know.
Interesting to see what you make of the crazy, I mean, it's like past 600-700 pages, but you can read as much as you want, of Giacomo Moreno, Who Shall Survive.
I uploaded that already in the classroom.
It's already there?
It's already in the classroom for people to download, yeah.
Okay, have a look.
Because I saw it as an important reference in your paper, and I thought it's anything from the 30s. I'm so eager to read, because anything before World War II and what happened in World War II is so important. You know what I mean? For me, for like the development of the world after World War II. So I was really excited, and I found it, and I added it to the classroom reading.
Easy book. It's the Godhead, the divinity. It's crazy. And there's a good story about Giacomo Moreno and Ella Fitzgerald, I can tell you. Again. And also Radcliffe Brown. Let's read some, something about social network analysis more specific. That'd be interesting. Why
don't you tell us the anecdote with Fitzgerald today? Because we still have 10 minutes of time.
Well, one of the first things that Moreno invented sociometry. So he was the one who actually drew first this little diagram, with the nodes, and he used those to map relationships between social individuals, let's say, in all kinds of places. It first started in a refugee camp in the Südtirol at the end of World War I, mapping the relationship between in the camp. And then he went on to Sing Sing. And then the third big study they did was about a juvenile prison for girls in New York, where there had been an epidemic of runaways. So the girls kept running away from this camp. So it was called in to produce kind of sociometric maps of relationship between the girls on the juvenile prison, asking them who they were friends with, who they liked most, trying to understand, how the kind of social graph explained the girls who ran away. And I found out that basically one of the girls who was at this prison in upstate New York while he was doing this study was Ella Fitzgerald. She had been put there for being too mouthy with her mother, which is an interesting thing. It's about a Facebook group that came up later in Africa. So she'd been put there. So she was an inmate while Giacomo Moreno she was 15, right? was doing his work, and even if he claimed that his study brought down the number of runaways in the prison, Ella Fitzgerald managed to run away. So she's yeah, she was one of while he was there and while he was doing the study. Because so that's an interesting story.
So if we end up 15 minutes early today, we can use this time maybe in the third class or in my class. So it's up to you if you guys want to continue the discussion, because we still have about like 5-10 minutes time left, or we can
I'm still recovering. I'm surprised. I mean, it revitalized me, because I spent half of this afternoon lying on the couch feeling really crap about this terrible flu. So, but I think, you know, I'm at the end of my energy. I need to eat something now.
No problem. We can bank it and use it in the third session, which I'm sure will be attended by all the people that are not here, and we will need that time.
Okay.
So if everybody's
about the blockchain as well next time, maybe we can.
Yeah, actually, that question I'm going to post it also to the classroom, and once you get your username, I'm sure by tomorrow you will have your email and username. So
that's great. It's nice to see you again virtually, Mo, and
yes,
thank you everybody for attending this class.
Yes, and we'll all get together next week, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. European time. So and if you're in London, that will be like 6 p.m. right?
Okay.
Okay. So
okay.
You all check your email for the stuff. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.